My sister Madison looked me dead in the eye, a sneer twisting her perfectly made-up face, and then she dumped a steaming bowl of beef soup right on my head. Hot liquid, chunks of meat, and carrots cascaded down my hair, stinging my scalp, soaking my dress. And then she said the words that would change everything. "You've got 15 minutes to leave my family." The world seemed to tilt. My parents, who sat at the head of the elegant table, didn't react with shock or anger. No, they started to applaud. Slowly, deliberately. My father Gregory leaned forward and added, "Some children just don't belong at family celebrations." My mother Diane, the birthday girl herself, nodded, a small chilling smile playing on her lips. "Finally," she murmured, "someone's being honest about who's wanted." I sat there frozen, the hot soup dripping from my hair onto the expensive linen tablecloth, a vivid stain spreading across the pristine white. Madison stood over me, the empty soup bowl still clutched in her manicured hands, that sneer making her look truly ugly despite her flawless appearance. Around us, the chatter of the birthday party guests had died completely. Champagne glasses hung suspended mid-air, mouths agape in collective disbelief. "Pack up whatever cheap gift you brought and get out." Madison's voice, sharp and cold, cut through the absolute silence of La Belle Maisen's private dining room. This was supposed to be Mom's 60th birthday celebration, not my public execution. My eyes found my parents. I expected outrage, a defense, anything but what I got. My father slowly, deliberately, set down his wine glass. My mother dabbed at her lips with a napkin, her eyes as cold and distant as they'd been for years. And then they clapped. That slow, methodical applause echoed in my ears, louder than any explosion, communicating approval, agreement, finality. Other family members shifted uncomfortably, but no one, not a single soul, spoke up. No one defended me. "Some children just don't belong at family celebrations," my father repeated, his voice taking on that professorial tone he always used when he thought he was imparting profound wisdom. "It's better to acknowledge reality than to pretend otherwise." My mother, God bless her, nodded again. "Finally, someone's being honest about who's wanted here." The soup was burning my scalp. It soaked through my blouse, thick, meaty drops splashing onto the floor. I could feel pieces of beef and carrots sliding down my neck. For a moment I couldn't breathe. For a moment I was 7 years old again, watching Madison blow out candles on a cake that said, "Happy birthday Madison and Natalie," even though my birthday was still weeks away, and they'd never planned anything just for me. But I wasn't 7 anymore. I was 32, and I'd spent the last 8 years preparing for something exactly like this, even if I hadn't known it would happen in such a spectacular, humiliating fashion. I reached into my bag slowly, deliberately. My hands, surprisingly, were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I pulled out a thick leather portfolio. Waterproof, thank God. I stood up, soup still dripping from my hair, and walked to the head of the table where my parents sat like monarchs presiding over their kingdom. The documents hit the table with a satisfying thwack that made several people jump. "Fine," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. 15 minutes. But when I leave, everything that's mine goes with me. My father frowned, confusion flickering across his distinguished features. "What are you talking about? What is this?" I flipped open the portfolio to the first page. A legal document, official seals, signatures. "This is the deed to the house you're living in. The house you've been living in for the past 7 years. The house that's in my name because I bought it when you were facing bankruptcy after Dad's business failed." The color drained from both their faces, but I wasn't finished. I flipped to the next document. "This is the title to your car, Mother. The Mercedes you love so much. Also in my name. Purchased with my money 3 years ago when your credit was destroyed." Madison had stepped back from the table, her sneer melting from her face like wax. "What is she talking about?" "I'm talking about reality," I said, throwing my father's own words back at him. "The reality that you've all been living in a fantasy I've been funding for nearly a decade." My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. "Natalie, don't be ridiculous. Your father's business recovered years ago." "Did it?" I flipped through several more pages, financial records, bank statements, loan documents. "Because according to these records, the recovery has been my money, funneled through a business account I set up to preserve your dignity. Every contract you thought you landed, I arranged it through my connections in tech. Every payment you thought was from clients? It came from my accounts." The restaurant manager appeared in the doorway, alerted by the commotion, but I ignored him. I was on a roll now, years of silence breaking apart like a dam that had finally cracked. "And Madison," I turned to my sister, the golden child from the moment she was born 3 years after me. "Do you want to know who's been anonymously funding your boutique for the past 5 years? The boutique that's never turned a profit, but somehow stays open? The boutique where you get to play fashion entrepreneur, while actual business owners struggle." She shook her head, backing away further. "You're lying. Brad invested in my business. My husband put up the money. Brad doesn't have that kind of money. Brad's a middle manager at a regional insurance company who barely makes six figures. I pulled out another document. I have the bank records right here. Every month, $45,000 gets transferred from one of my business accounts into your boutique's operating fund. You've burned through nearly $3 million of my money. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. My father found his voice first, though it came out hoarse and uncertain. Why would you do this? Why would you help us if we've treated you? He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't acknowledge out loud what they'd done for years. The exclusion, the favoritism, the casual cruelty dressed up as honesty. Because you're my family, I said simply, and I hated how my voice cracked on that word. Because despite everything, I kept hoping that if I was successful enough, helpful enough, generous enough, you'd finally see me. Really see me, not just as the daughter who didn't quite measure up to the golden child. My mother's eyes were wet, but I couldn't tell if it was from shame or anger or fear about what came next. Probably fear. Mom had always been practical above all else. But you've made it abundantly clear tonight what I am to you, I continued, reaching up to wipe soup from my face with a napkin from the table. I'm someone who doesn't belong. Someone who can be humiliated in public and dismissed like a servant. Someone whose only value is what I can provide, not who I am. I started gathering the documents back into the portfolio, organizing them with the same meticulous care I'd used to build my software company from scratch. The company that had made me rich beyond anything my family could have imagined. So, here's how this is going to work, I said, looking at each of them in turn. You have 15 minutes, just like Madison said. 15 minutes before I make a few phone calls. The first call will be to my real estate attorney to start eviction proceedings on the house. California law gives you 60 days, but I'll have the locks changed and utilities transferred out of my name within a week. My father half rose from his chair. You can't. I absolutely can. It's my house. I flipped to another page. The second call will be to the bank that holds the note on your Mercedes, Mother. Funny thing about loans. When the collateral owner requests immediate repossession, that car will be gone by tomorrow morning. Madison's husband, Brad, had gone pale, his hand clutching his wife's arm. He, at least, seemed to understand the magnitude of what was happening. The third call, I continued, my voice never wavering, will be to shut down the business accounts that have been keeping Dad's consulting firm afloat. Without that buffer, the real financial state of your company becomes immediately apparent. I give it 2 weeks before creditors start circling. You wouldn't, Madison whispered. You wouldn't destroy your own family. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had been my sister for 32 years, but had never once stood up for me. Never once questioned why I was always the one left out, forgotten, dismissed. You just dumped scalding soup on my head and told me to leave my own family. You destroyed us long before I did. The thing about being the overlooked child is that nobody pays attention to what you're doing. While Madison was posting Instagram stories about her boutique, and my parents were bragging to their friends about their successful daughter, the fashion entrepreneur, I was working 100-hour weeks building something real. I was coding until my eyes burned, pitching to investors until my voice went hoarse, making strategic decisions that turned my small software startup into a company worth $800 million. I'd done it quietly, using my mother's maiden name as my surname to avoid any association with a family that had never believed in me. Chun Technologies was mine, wholly and completely mine. The tech press called me a prodigy, a visionary, one of the most successful female founders in Silicon Valley. And my family had no idea. Why would they? They'd never ask about my work beyond vague questions about whether I was still doing that computer thing. They'd never wondered how I could afford to buy them a house or fund their lifestyle. They'd simply taken it the way people take oxygen, assuming it would always be there. I've also taken the liberty, I said, pulling out my phone, of documenting tonight's events. Funny thing about upscale restaurants, they have security cameras everywhere. I'm sure the footage of Madison assaulting me with hot soup will be very interesting to the police should I choose to file charges. Madison's face went from pale to green. An assault charge would ruin the carefully curated image she'd built for herself as a sophisticated businesswoman. And before you think about denying any of this or claiming I'm being vindictive, I continued, addressing the room at large now, speaking to the aunts and uncles and cousins who'd also never quite included me in their inner circle, I should mention that I've been working with a documentary crew for the past 6 months. They're doing a piece on successful female entrepreneurs who overcame adversity. Tonight's footage will make for a very compelling episode about family dysfunction and betrayal. That was a lie. There was no documentary crew, but they didn't know that. And the uncertainty flickering across their faces told me the bluff had landed. My mother finally spoke, her voice small and defeated. What do you want from us? Want? I laughed, and it came out bitter and harsh. I don't want anything from you anymore. That's the point. I wanted a family. I wanted parents who were proud of me. I wanted a sister who loved me. But you can't give me those things because you don't have them to give. I closed the portfolio and tucked it back into my bag. The soup had stopped dripping, leaving me sticky and uncomfortable, but I stood tall anyway. What I'm telling you is that you have a choice to make. You can accept that your lifestyle is about to change dramatically, or we can come to an arrangement. My father leaned forward, and I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was a negotiator at heart. Always had been. What kind of arrangement? I'm not a monster, I said, though part of me wondered if that was true. I'm not going to leave you homeless and destitute. But the free ride is over. If you want to continue living in that house, you'll pay market rate rent. If you want to keep the car, you'll take over the payments. And Madison's boutique stops receiving funding immediately. That's impossible, my father protested. We can't afford rent on that house. The monthly payment would be over $8,000. Then downsize, I interrupted. Sell things. Make actual sacrifices instead of just pretending to struggle while living on my dime. Or here's a radical idea. Actually make your business profitable instead of coasting on the illusion of success I've been creating for you. Madison was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. My boutique is my life. Everything I've built. You haven't built anything, I said flatly. I built it. You just showed up and played dress up with my money. If the boutique has any value, any real value, then it should be able to survive without my constant financial transfusions. Her husband Brad finally spoke up, his voice careful. What exactly do you want in exchange for? For maintaining the current arrangement. I want acknowledgement, I said. Written acknowledgement from each of you about what's really been happening. Who's been funding your lives? Who's been keeping you afloat? I want it documented, signed, and notarized. That's blackmail, my mother said weakly. No, that's truth. I pulled my coat from the back of my chair, ignoring how the soup had stained the silk lining. Blackmail would be if I threatened to expose you unless you paid me. I'm doing the opposite. I'm offering to continue supporting you financially in exchange for you acknowledging reality. You can decline, of course, but then we're back to eviction and repossession. My cousin Jennifer, who had been watching the whole scene unfold with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. Why did you keep helping them if they treated you so badly? It was the first time anyone in my family had asked me a direct question all evening. I turned to look at her, this woman I'd grown up with who joined in the casual exclusion without probably ever thinking about it. Because I kept thinking things would change, I admitted. Every time I helped them out of a financial crisis, every time I solved a problem they couldn't solve themselves, I thought maybe they'd finally see my worth. Maybe they'd finally treat me like I mattered. But they didn't, Jennifer said softly. No, they didn't. They took and took and took. And they still treated me like an inconvenience, like someone they were doing a favor by allowing to family gatherings. I gestured at my soup-soaked clothes. Case in point. My father had been studying the tablecloth, but now he looked up at me. For the first time I saw something in his eyes that might have been shame. We didn't know about your company, about how successful you'd become. You didn't ask, I cut him off. You didn't care to ask. You assumed I was just getting by, barely making ends meet with my computer thing. And you let me fund your entire lifestyle without ever questioning where the money was coming from. We thought it was inheritance from Grandma Chan, my mother said quickly. When she passed away, we assumed she'd left you something. Grandma Chan left me $15,000, I said. The same amount she left Madison. What I built myself. No help from any of you. The truth was more complicated. Of course, Grandma Chan had believed in me. She'd been the one person in my family who'd encouraged my interest in technology, who told me I was smart enough to do anything I wanted. When she died during my second year of college, I'd used that $15,000 as seed money for my first business venture, a small app that helped students organize their class schedules. I'd sold it for $200,000 6 months later. From there, I'd bootstrapped my way up, reinvesting every dollar, working every angle, learning from every failure. By the time I was 25, I'd sold my second company for $12 million. By 30, Chen Technologies had gone public, and I was worth more money than my family could spend in 10 lifetimes. And they'd never noticed. So what happens now? Brad asked. He was the only one who seemed to be thinking practically about the situation. Madison was still crying. My parents looked shell-shocked. The other dinner guests were pretending to be invisible. Now you decide, I said. You have until noon tomorrow to give me your answer. Either you sign the acknowledgement documents and we maintain a business relationship where you pay reasonable rent and car payments and the boutique closes, or you take your chances without me. Those are the only two options. That's not fair, Madison said through her tears. You can't just what? I turned to face her directly. Can't just set boundaries? Can't just stop letting you walk all over me? Can't just refuse to fund your delusions anymore? You humiliated me in front of everyone tonight. You literally poured hot soup on my head and told me to leave. What exactly do you think fair looks like? She had no answer to that. I looked around the table one last time at the fancy place settings, the expensive wine bottles, the elaborately decorated birthday cake that spelled out Happy 60th Diane in gold frosting. All of it paid for with my credit card, naturally. They probably assumed I'd pick up the bill tonight too. I'll be sending you each an invoice for your portion of tonight's dinner, I said. Consider it the first step in your new financial reality. My mother made a small sound of distress, but I ignored it. I walked to the door of the private dining room, my shoes squishing slightly from the soup that had dripped down my clothes. The restaurant manager approached me, concern written across his face. Miss, are you all right? Should we call the police? I considered it. Part of me wanted to see Madison arrested, wanted to see her processed and fingerprinted and humiliated the way she'd humiliated me. But that would just be revenge, and I was aiming for something cleaner than that. I'm fine, I told him. But I'd appreciate a copy of your security footage from tonight for insurance purposes. He nodded, understanding immediately that there was a story here he probably didn't want to know. Of course. If you provide your email, I'll have our security team send it to you within the hour. I gave him my information and then walked out into the cool San Francisco night. My car was where I'd left it. A modest Honda Civic that I kept despite being able to afford anything I wanted. I'd never been interested in flashy displays of wealth. Maybe that's why my family had never guessed the truth. The drive back to my apartment in Pacific Heights took 20 minutes. Long enough for the adrenaline to start wearing off and the reality of what had just happened to sink in. I'd just blown up my family. Intentionally, methodically, with receipts and documentation and cold precision. Was I a terrible person? I pulled into my parking garage and sat in my car for a long moment, still covered in soup, my hands shaking now that the performance was over. My phone was buzzing with texts. My mother, my father, Madison, Brad, even a few cousins. I didn't read any of them. Instead, I called my best friend, Rebecca, the one person who knew the whole story, who'd been encouraging me for years to cut them off. Did you do it? She asked immediately upon answering. I did it, I said, and suddenly I was crying great gulping sobs that made my chest hurt. She poured soup on me, Rebecca. Hot soup right on my head. And they applauded. Jesus Christ, Rebecca breathed. Are you okay? Are you burned? I don't know. I don't think so. It was hot but not boiling. I wiped my face with my sleeve, which just smeared more soup around. I told them everything. Showed them all the documents. Gave them an ultimatum. Good, Rebecca said fiercely. It's about damn time. Do you need me to come over? Yes, I whispered. Please. She arrived 40 minutes later with Chinese takeout, clean clothes, and a bottle of wine. She helped me wash the soup out of my hair. There was a slight redness on my scalp, but no real burns. And listen while I talked through everything that had happened. You know they're going to try to guilt you, she said as we sat on my couch, containers of lo mein spread across the coffee table. They're going to say you're being cruel, that you're abandoning them. That family should stick together. I know. I took a long drink of wine. Part of me already feels guilty. Part of me wants to take it all back. That's the conditioning talking, Rebecca said. They've spent your entire life training you to feel responsible for their happiness, while they gave you nothing in return. You don't owe them anything, Nat. Not after how they've treated you. I knew she was right intellectually. Emotionally was another story. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from my father. Asterisk, we need to talk. This is ridiculous. You're being emotional and irrational. Let's discuss this like adults tomorrow. Asterisk, I showed Rebecca the message. She snorted. Like adults? They had their adult daughter physically assaulted and humiliated at a birthday party. But sure, you're the one being irrational. What should I say? Nothing. Let them sweat. She poured herself more wine. Or better yet, have your lawyer respond. This is a legal matter now. Anyway, she was right about that too. I pulled up my attorney's number, David Nakamura, a ruthless litigator who'd helped me with various business matters over the years. I sent him a text summarizing what had happened and asking him to prepare the acknowledgement documents I'd mentioned. He responded within minutes. Asterisk on it. Don't communicate with them directly. Let me handle everything from here. Asterisk, over the next week, my family tried everything. My mother called crying, saying I was breaking her heart. My father sent long emails about family loyalty and forgiveness. Madison showed up at my office building. Security turned her away, and then tried to doorstep me at my apartment. I called the police. The documents David prepared were thorough and damning. They outlined every payment I'd made, every debt I'd covered, every financial crisis I'd solved. They required signatures acknowledging that the family's lifestyle had been entirely subsidized by me, that their businesses and possessions were purchased with my money, and that any future financial support would be considered a loan to be repaid. My parents signed. They had no choice, really. The alternative was homelessness and bankruptcy. My father's consulting firm had already started hemorrhaging clients once the financial buffer I provided was removed. The illusion of success had been just that, an illusion. Madison refused to sign at first. She held out for 3 days, convinced I was bluffing, convinced I'd back down because that's what I'd always done before. But on the 4th day, when the boutique's landlord called about unpaid rent, and her suppliers started demanding payment for goods delivered on credit, she finally broke. She showed up at David's office, mascara streaked, designer clothes rumpled, looking nothing like the polished entrepreneur she pretended to be. David told me later that she'd cried through the entire signing, kept saying it wasn't fair, that I was destroying her dreams. But here's the thing about dreams. They're supposed to be built on something real. Madison's entire life had been built on my money and my silence. Now that I'd withdrawn both, the whole structure was collapsing. The house situation resolved itself in an unexpected way. My parents couldn't afford the rent I was asking. Market rate for a 4-bedroom in their neighborhood was $7,500 a month, so they agreed to sell it. I gave them until the end of the year to move out, which was generous considering they'd literally applauded when my sister assaulted me. The proceeds from the sale came to me since I owned the property. I took what they owed me in back payments and interest, almost $400,000, and gave them the rest, about $650,000, enough for a down payment on something smaller, more realistic, more in line with their actual financial situation. Madison's boutique closed within a month. Without my funding, she couldn't make payroll, couldn't pay rent, couldn't keep inventory stocked. She tried to rebrand it as an online-only operation, but without the physical storefront and the carefully curated Instagram aesthetic, nobody cared about her overpriced clothes. Last I heard, she'd taken a job as a sales associate at Nordstrom. It was honest work, at least more honest than anything she'd been doing before. My father's consulting firm didn't survive either. Once his actual track record became apparent, the failed contracts, the missed deadlines, the reputation for overpromising and under-delivering, clients left in droves. He ended up taking a salary position at a mid-sized firm, working for someone else for the first time in 20 years. My mother went back to work too, part-time at a nonprofit, supplementing their reduced income. They moved into a 2-bedroom condo in San Jose, about 40 miles from their previous house. Downsizing was hard for them. My mother complained constantly about the lack of space, the noise from the neighbors, the long commute to visit their friends. But they were surviving. They were experiencing what the majority of Americans experience every day. Working for a living, managing a budget, making choices based on what they could afford rather than what they wanted. As for me, I threw myself into my work. Chun Technologies launched a new product line that analysts called revolutionary. We expanded into 3 new markets. Our stock price climbed 20% in 6 months. I made Forbes' list of most powerful women in tech. And I was miserable. Rebecca noticed first. We were having dinner at my favorite Thai place, a hole-in-the-wall restaurant in the Tenderloin that served the best pad see ew in the city, when she put down her chopsticks and looked at me directly. "You're not happy." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "You got everything you wanted. You set boundaries. You held them accountable. You freed yourself from their toxicity. But you look more miserable now than you did when you were letting them walk all over you." I pushed food around my plate. I thought I'd feel vindicated. I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I just feel empty. "Because you burned down the only family you had," Rebecca said gently. "And even though they treated you terribly, they were still your family. You're allowed to grieve that loss." She was right. Of course I was grieving. Grieving the family I'd wanted, the family I tried to create through sheer force of will and financial support. Grieving the fantasy that if I just did enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, they'd finally love me the way I needed to be loved. But the grief came with something else too. A strange sense of peace. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't responsible for anyone but myself. I wasn't tracking their bills, managing their crises, funding their delusions. I was free of that burden, even if the freedom felt lonelier than I'd expected. 6 months after the soup incident, that's how I thought of it now, the soup incident, like it was some minor embarrassment rather than the nuclear event that detonated my family. My mother reached out. Not with demands or guilt trips, but with a simple email. *, can we talk? Just you and me. *, I almost deleted it. Rebecca told me I should delete it. David advised against any contact without legal representation. But something in the simplicity of the message got to me. Just you and me. Not demanding, not assuming, just asking. We met at a coffee shop in Oakland, neutral territory, halfway between her new place and mine. She looked older than I remembered, her hair grayer, her face more lined. She ordered a small coffee, not the elaborate latte she used to favor. Even her clothes were different, practical, modest. Clearly not designer. "Thank you for meeting me," she said after we'd sat down at a corner table. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring down at it like the foam held answers to questions she hadn't figured out how to ask yet. I've been in therapy. Your father and I both have since everything happened. I didn't respond, just waited. My therapist asked me to describe you, she continued. To talk about who you are, what you're like, what makes you unique. And I realized I couldn't do it. I could tell her about Madison easily. Her love of fashion, her social butterfly personality, her struggles with anxiety. But when it came to you, she trailed off, her voice breaking slightly. I knew facts. I knew you worked in technology, that you were smart, that you'd always been independent. But I couldn't tell her who you really are. I don't know you. I've never really known you. Something in my chest cracked open, a wound I'd kept carefully sealed. Why? I asked, and my voice came out smaller than I intended. Why didn't you ever want to know me? She looked up then, and her eyes were wet. Because you didn't need us. From the time you were small, you were so self-sufficient, so capable. You figured things out on your own. You solved your own problems. And Madison was always struggling, always needing help, and it was easier to focus on the child who demanded attention than the one who seemed fine without it. I wasn't fine, I said quietly. I was lonely. I was hurt. I needed you just as much as Madison did. I just didn't show it the same way. I know that now, she said, wiping her eyes with a napkin. But by the time I realized it, we'd established this pattern. You were the strong one, the one who didn't need us. And then you started helping us financially, and it became even easier to take you for granted. You were solving our problems instead of us solving yours. You could have stopped me, I pointed out. You could have asked where the money was coming from. You could have questioned why your struggling daughter could suddenly afford to buy you a house. We should have, she agreed. We should have done a lot of things differently. But we were drowning, and you threw us a lifeline, and we grabbed it without thinking about what it cost you. We sat in silence for a while, the coffee shop bustling around us with the noise of espresso machines and casual conversations. What do you want from me? I finally asked. Why did you want to meet? I don't want anything, she said. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What we did to you, how badly we failed you. And I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. Not because I want your money back or because I want things to go back to how they were. Just because you deserve an apology. Do you mean it? The question came out harsher than I intended. Or is this just another manipulation? She flinched but didn't look away. I mean it. And I understand if you don't believe me. I understand if you never want to see me again. But I needed to say it anyway. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, of ulterior motives, of the same dismissive attitude that had characterized our relationship for 3 decades. But all I saw was tired regret and genuine remorse. I don't forgive you, I said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I appreciate you saying it. She nodded. That's fair. More than fair. We finished our coffee and parted ways. She didn't ask for another meeting. Didn't push for more than I was willing to give. And somehow that restraint meant more than any grand gesture could have. Over the following months she reached out occasionally. Brief emails, never demanding a response. Updates on her life, questions about mine that seemed genuinely curious rather than perfunctory. I responded sometimes, kept it brief, maintained my boundaries. It wasn't a relationship exactly, but it was something. A tiny thread of connection where before there'd been only transaction and disappointment. My father never apologized. I didn't expect him to. He'd always been too proud, too certain of his own rightness. The last I heard, he was working 60-hour weeks at his new job, struggling with the reality of being an employee rather than a boss. Part of me felt sorry for him. Most of me didn't. Madison sent a long text message on my birthday, 11 months after the soup incident. It was rambling and emotional, full of apologies and regrets and explanations. She talked about how she'd been jealous of me, how she felt overshadowed despite being the favorite child, how she resented my independence and capability. She admitted she'd known about some of the financial support, not all of it but some, and had chosen not to question it because it benefited her. I read the message twice, then put my phone away. Maybe someday I'd be ready to respond. Maybe someday I'd be ready to rebuild something with her. But that day wasn't today, and forcing it wouldn't help either of us. The thing about burning down your family is that you have to build something new in the ashes. I started having regular dinners with Rebecca and her wife. I joined a book club. I volunteered with a program that taught coding to underprivileged kids. I slowly, carefully built a chosen family. People who saw me, valued me, treated me like I mattered, not because of what I could provide, but because of who I was. And gradually, the emptiness started to fill in with something else. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but contentment. Peace. The knowledge that I'd set boundaries that needed setting, that I'd stood up for myself when nobody else would, that I'd walked away from a toxic situation even though it hurt. Chun Technologies continued to grow. We hired 500 new employees. We opened an office in Austin. Forbes did a feature article on my leadership style, calling me innovative and compassionate. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was better at building a functional work family than I'd ever been at maintaining my actual family. A year and a half after the soup incident, my mother asked if she could come to my office for a tour. Not to ask for anything, she clarified in her email, just to see what I built, to understand this part of my life she'd never paid attention to. I almost said no, but something made me say yes instead. She showed up on time, dressed professionally but simply, clearly nervous. I gave her the full tour. The open plan workspace, the game room, the cafeteria with its locally sourced ingredients, the meditation room, the childcare center we built for employees with kids. I introduced her to my team leads, explained our product lines, showed her the awards we'd won. She didn't say much during the tour, just listened and nodded and asked occasional questions that showed she was really trying to understand. Afterward, we sat in my office, glass-walled, overlooking the bay, and she looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Pride. "You built this," she said softly. "You built all of this and we had no idea. We were so busy focusing on Madison's little boutique that we missed you creating an empire." "It's not an empire," I said. "It's just a company, a successful company, but still. It's more than that." She gestured at the open workspace visible through my office windows where dozens of employees were collaborating, creating, building. "It's a place where people matter, where they're valued, where they can grow." She paused. "It's everything you needed from us and never got." The observation was so accurate it stole my breath. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know I have no right to be. I know I forfeited that right a long time ago, but I am. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished, who you've become, the strength it took to walk away from us." I felt tears prick my eyes and blinked them back. "It would have meant everything to hear you say that 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago." "I know," she said. "And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." We sat in silence for a while. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just real. Two women who happened to share DNA, trying to figure out if there could be anything more between them than biology and broken trust. "I don't know if we can fix this," I finally said. "I don't know if I want to try." "I understand," she said. "But if you ever decide you want to try even a little bit, I'll be here. No expectations, no demands. Just here." She left after that, and I sat in my office for a long time watching the sunset over the San Francisco Bay. Rebecca called as I was packing up to leave. "How'd it go with your mom?" she asked. "Weird," I said. "But maybe okay weird. I don't know. Are you going to see her again?" "Maybe. Eventually. On my terms." I locked my office door and headed for the elevator. I'm not ready to forgive everything, but I think I might be ready to stop being quite so angry. "That's progress," Rebecca said. "Anger is exhausting to carry around." She was right about that. The rage that had sustained me through the initial aftermath of the soup incident had burned itself out, leaving behind something quieter but more durable. Sadness for what could have been. Acceptance of what actually was. And underneath it all, a fierce protectiveness of the boundaries I'd established. I would never again let anyone, family or otherwise, treat me as less than I was. I would never again sacrifice my own well-being for someone else's comfort. I would never again confuse love with obligation, or generosity with self-erasure. The soup incident had been humiliating, painful and traumatic. But it had also been clarifying. It had forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding, to make choices I'd been postponing, to become the person I'd always had the potential to be. 2 years after that night, I'm sitting in my office on a Friday afternoon reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant tells me there's a delivery. I go to the front desk to find a small package, wrapped simply, with my name written in a familiar handwriting. Madison's. Inside is a framed photo I'd forgotten existed. Me and her, maybe 7 and 4 years old, dressed in matching Halloween costumes. I'm holding her hand, and she's looking up at me with complete trust and adoration. On the back in fresh ink she's written, *, I remember when you were my hero. I'm sorry I forgot. I'm sorry I made you forget too. *, I stand there holding the photo, memories washing over me. There had been good times before the favoritism calcified into something toxic, before the financial dependence created resentment, before everything went wrong. There had been moments when we'd actually been sisters. I don't know if those moments are enough to build something new on. I don't know if I want to try. But I keep the photo, place it on a shelf in my office next to my awards and certifications. A reminder of what was, what could have been, and what might still be possible someday. For now though, I'm okay with where I am. I'm okay with my chosen family, my successful company, my hard-won boundaries. I'm okay with being the woman who walked away from a family that didn't value her, who refused to accept crumbs when she deserved a feast, who demanded respect even when it cost her everything. The soup stains never did come out of my silk coat lining. I kept it anyway, hanging in the back of my closet, A reminder of the moment everything changed. The moment I finally chose myself. And sometimes on hard days when guilt creeps in or doubt whispers that I was too harsh, too unforgiving, too cold, I touch that stained silk and remember. They applauded when I was humiliated. They celebrated my degradation. They made their choice clear. I just finally accepted it. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming. This whole journey has been a testament to finding my own worth, even when the people closest to me tried to deny it. Have you ever had to choose yourself over your family, or walk away from a toxic situation that just kept taking? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.